Basin seasonal outlook for September through December. Over the last 30 days, we've seen very warm temperatures over much of the Great Basin. However, earlier in August, we did see wetter conditions over much of Nevada into Utah and even eastern Idaho into Wyoming. However, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen very hot and dry conditions really region-wide across Nevada and into Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, really much of the West. A lot of the monsoon moisture with a strong ridge in place across the Great Basin has suppressed much of the monsoon moisture further south, so we have seen very hot and dry conditions in all areas of the Great Basin, with even near record temperatures for a very extended period over the last 7 to 10 days or so over the northern half of the Great Basin. Since the beginning of the water year last October 1st, we've seen some sporadic wetter conditions over parts of western Nevada, which was largely attributed to some summertime moisture, but also what we saw in the winter months, and then across parts of the north and really the periphery of the Great Basin, but certainly some drier spots over mainly central areas. Looking at our precipitation in the winter, fall area all the way through the spring, you can kind of see the progression. We did have some wetter conditions in October and December, but really dry conditions every other month until we did see some wetter conditions during the fire season. However, due to this very hot and dry period that took us through basically the last half of August, we have seen a significant decline in our fuel moisture and an increase in fire danger. Our 10-hour fuel moistures are critical region-wide, but certainly the driest over the northern half of the Great Basin. And the 100-hour fuels have actually recovered quite a bit over all areas, including parts of Utah, where we did have some deeper monsoon moisture this season. But again, with the hotter and drier conditions, fuel moistures have really come down to critical across many areas. 1,000-hour fuel moistures, again, have responded, not quite as fast, obviously, but over the northern half of the Great Basin are certainly critical. ERCs have also been trending steadily upwards with this hot and dry period, and most areas of the northern half of the Great Basin, including into northern Utah, are approaching near records for the time of year and are even getting up above the 90th or 97th percentile, especially across Idaho and into northern and western Nevada. But even over southern areas of the Great Basin, ERCs have certainly recovered significantly and are now above normal even in the far south. Looking at some of our fine fuel growth, we did have some pockets of fine fuel growth, especially total herbaceous, over southern areas of the Great Basin and even over northwest Utah. But really it was the annual herbaceous component that extends along the Snake River Plain that was well above normal for the time of year. So this will certainly be a focus when we have dry cold fronts come through, fast-moving grass fires if we do have starts in these areas. Also, over a few pockets of northwest Nevada, there were some areas of above normal fuel growth, but for the most part, really below normal fine fuel growth over the southern two-thirds of the Great Basin. Soil moisture has been drying, especially in California into western and northern areas of the Great Basin, but even seeing some drying across Utah with that monsoon moisture suppressed further south. Looking at our drought outlook, we still have extreme to severe drought across much of Utah into southern eastern Nevada and even northwest Nevada, and we are seeing some of that drought push further north into southern Idaho. Right now, central Idaho is still in the abnormally dry category, as they did have some relatively normal or even maybe just below normal winter precipitation. But again, very hot and dry conditions have continued, so we expect the drought to continue in many of the same areas, although we could have some improvement over far southern areas of the Great Basin with the healthy monsoon we saw much of this year. Looking at the drought changes over the last year, August 2021 is on the left, August 2022 is on the right, and you can see we have had some improvements even though the drought still exists across much of Nevada and Utah. We are not seeing that dark red, that exceptional drought category into much of the region anymore. And even up in Idaho, we did have extreme to exceptional drought, but again, that has really improved just with some of the wintertime storms into the spring as well. The Evaporative Demand Drought Index, which shows more of the shorter term flash drought, not really much of any significance except for areas along the Sierra Front into far western Nevada, where we did see this prolonged hot and dry period extend a little bit longer than areas north or east in the basin. So again, we are seeing those drier conditions. But we're starting to see some of that drying obviously up into Idaho and northern Utah and Wyoming as well. So putting everything together, looking at our longer term La Nina El Nino patterns, currently on the map here, kind of sort of towards the left, we are in a state of weak La Nina, and we've been in that state for some time. It looks like we may remain along the same curve going in the next couple months, but later in the fall and the winter, we may dip down a little bit more, kind of another dip to La Nina. So we are staying in these cooler conditions with the ocean temperatures in the equatorial Pacific until possibly going into next spring, where we may see some warming back in the neutral category. But what this means for us for the winter, this is our classic La Nina winter pattern where we see wetter conditions in the Pacific Northwest, clipping northern Nevada and going into Idaho, along with cooler temperatures. And then we typically see warmer and drier conditions in the southern areas of the Great Basin. Looking at the 8 to 14 day outlook, we are expecting moisture to return to the Great Basin as we go towards the middle of September. We do have some tropical features in the eastern Pacific, which could push some of that tropical moisture up into the Great Basin at times. So we'll be watching that especially towards mid to late September. And that would also temper some of the hot temperatures we've been seeing recently and push those really hot temperatures into the central areas of the country. So looking at a little bit longer range over the next 4 months, again, still that warm and dry conditions continuing at least for the first half of September, with that moisture potentially increasing as we go towards mid to late month. And then as we go into October, still kind of warm and dry conditions across the Great Basin, but it's really towards November, December where we may start to see that more traditional La Nina pattern settle in, and we'll start to see potentially some wetter conditions towards the northern half of the Great Basin and those continued warm and dry conditions in the south. So putting everything together, right now we're still expecting above normal fire potential through much of September for Idaho, especially into parts of northwest Nevada and even the higher elevations of the Sierra Front. This is currently where we've had most of our large fires this year, and we do expect that to continue with these hot and dry conditions at least through the first half of September, and then hopefully some improvement as we get towards later in the month. Certainly we'll see shorter days, less burning periods, but with the very dry conditions we've seen with the overnight relative humidity staying very low, daytime humidity in the single digits, it's really been prolonging our burn periods even going into September. Over the southern half of the Great Basin, again with the hot, dry conditions, we will see those areas recover going through the middle of the month, so we could see some smaller fires pop up. Couldn't rule out a large fire or two, but we're not really seeing that threat for significant large fires over the southern half of the Great Basin. And then as we get into October through December, this is typically when our fire season winds down. Right now it's looking like that would be the case, especially with the cooler temperatures, possibly some moisture starting to materialize, especially towards November, December in the northern half of the area. But with southern half staying dry, again, we'll just see our fine fuels go into a state of dormancy, which would typically happen this time of year. And then we'll continue to watch the winter pattern for any areas that remain dry, especially if we start to see dry cold fronts increase the wind. But for right now, we're looking at more normal conditions returning later this year. That concludes our seasonal outlook for this month. Check back at the beginning of October for our next outlook.